Welcome, dear listener. You found your way to another quiet corner of history. Here with me, the sleepy historian. This is boring history for sleep, a place where the past is not rushed, not dramatic, but gentle, slow, and steady, designed to help you drift off into rest. Tonight, we will wander together through the cobblestone streets of ancient Rome, not in the halls of emperors or the clash of legions, but in the quieter rhythms of daily life. Our focus is the strange, humble, and surprisingly fascinating world of Roman street food. If this sort of soft-spoken history documentary helps you relax, if you find yourself easing into sleep while imagining the smoke of ancient cook fires or the soft murmur of voices in a Roman marketplace, then feel free to like this video or even subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. I'd love to know where you're listening from, and perhaps even what time of night it is as you press play. There's something strangely comforting in the thought that others, across cities and countries, are also closing their eyes to the same slow unfolding of stories. This channel is for those who enjoy falling asleep to boring history, for those who find bedtime relaxation in soft storytelling, and for listeners who enjoy a calm, soft-spoken history documentary. Here, we turn away from battlefields and heroes, instead embracing the soothing hum of ordinary lives, stories about food stalls, clay cups of wine, baked breads, and the rhythm of eating together long ago. Think of this as relaxing history to fall asleep to, a gentle journey where each detail is carefully laid out, so your mind can wander at its own pace. Tonight's theme is deceptively simple: food eaten in the streets. But in Rome, food was more than fuel. It was a reflection of class and culture, of wealth and poverty, of sacred ritual and ordinary survival. Most Romans, the plebeians, workers, travelers, and even slaves, did not cook elaborate meals at home. Instead, their nourishment came from taverns, market stalls, and little counters that spilled smoke and steam into the busy lanes of the city. We will explore these corners of Roman life, noticing what they ate, how they ate, and what it all meant in the larger structure of society. Our story will unfold in 4 gentle movements. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily life of an ordinary Roman, wandering through the markets and food stalls as the day begins. Then, we'll pause to trace a story, a particular life, or an event that shaped food culture in Rome. Next, we'll drift into the world of archaeology and mystery, exploring the ruins of ancient taverns and the strange artifacts left behind. Finally, we will look at the contrasts, how the elite dined in luxury while the streets fed the many, and how food reflected both unity and division in this vast city. So, take a deep breath. Let your shoulders ease, let your eyes grow heavy. Picture yourself among the ancient walls, where cooking fires flicker in the twilight and voices drift softly across a crowded forum. The past is waiting, not in haste, but in patience. Let the rhythm of their lives become the backdrop of your rest. Tonight, let the streets of Rome carry you slowly toward sleep. Imagine the city of Rome not as a silent ruin, but alive and restless, the way it was nearly 2,000 years ago. The streets are narrow and uneven, paved in dark stones worn smooth by countless footsteps. Between tall, crowded apartment blocks, the insulae, where ordinary people lived stacked one above another, the lanes are alive with movement. In the morning, shutters creak open. Merchants pull back simple cloth coverings from their stalls. The smell of cooking fires and smoke drifts into the air, carrying with it the familiar, comforting, and sometimes pungent scent of Roman street food. This is not the Rome of marble forums and majestic columns, at least not for the majority. It is the Rome of ordinary citizens, of workers and craftsmen, of women carrying water and children weaving through the crowd. For them, the rhythm of daily life is closely tied to the streets. Cooking at home is not always possible. Fuel is expensive, kitchens are rare in the cramped apartments, and the heat of fire would be dangerous in the upper levels of these tall, wooden structures. And so, food is bought and consumed outside, where the stalls and taverns provide warmth, sustenance, and community. You might picture a thermopolium, a kind of Roman snack bar. Along the front counter, set into stone, are round holes that once held clay jars, known as dolia. Inside, warm foods and drinks waited to be ladled out. Behind the counter, the vendor greets passers-by, sometimes with a bark of humor, sometimes with quiet routine. These stalls are not elegant, but they are essential. They are the heartbeat of a neighborhood. The foods offered are both simple and strange to us today. Flatbreads baked on hot stones, often topped with cheese, herbs, or leftover vegetables. Bowls of lentils or chickpeas simmered in oil. Sausages sizzling in their own fat. Olives glistening in small wooden bowls. Sometimes a splash of watered wine to wash it down. Nothing grand, nothing ornate, but deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. Picture yourself standing at one of these counters, holding a small cup of warm stew. Around you, voices blend into a low hum. Merchants haggling over prices, children chasing each other between the stalls, and the clip-clop of donkey hooves carrying goods deeper into the city. The air carries layers of scents: smoke from charcoal, the tang of garum, the fermented fish sauce so beloved by Romans, and the earthy sweetness of baked grain. To live in Rome is to live in a constant tide of smells and sounds, each tied to food. Meals are not divided into the strict breakfast, lunch, dinner we know today. In the morning, some Romans might grab a piece of bread dipped in wine, or a few dried figs from a vendor's stall. By midday, the streets grow busier, with workers pausing for a more filling dish, perhaps barley porridge or bread stuffed with bits of meat and cheese. In the evening, the wealthy might retreat to their villas for banquets, but the ordinary citizen returns to the thermopolium, finding warmth, light, and companionship there. It is a communal rhythm. Eating in public is not a sign of low status. It is simply the practical way of life for most. A shared cup, a shared loaf, eaten in the open air while the city continues its endless motion around you. In the small, ordinary exchanges at these stalls, we glimpse the vast machinery of Rome made personal. The city never truly sleeps. By torchlight or the dim glow of oil lamps, the streets are still alive long after sunset. Vendors linger, especially near the forums and theaters, where crowds spill out after performances. There, sausages might still be sizzling and cups of spiced wine passed into eager hands. Street food is not simply nourishment, but a companion to the social life of the city. Pause and imagine this atmosphere. The uneven stones under your feet, the faint ache of tired legs after a long day of labor, the comfort of hot food in cool night air. Around you, the sounds soften, voices blur, and the steady rhythm of Roman life becomes almost like a lullaby. The past, so distant, settles close, not in the clash of armies, but in the everyday need to eat, to share, to survive. Here, in the quiet observation of these streets, we find the first part of our journey, the immersion in daily life through food. And as you let the image of Rome at dusk settle in your mind, we prepare to move deeper into individual stories that show how food was not only sustenance, but also identity, memory, and meaning in the Roman world. As the morning hours deepen into midday, the pulse of Rome grows louder. The streets fill not only with residents, but with travelers and strangers, all drawn into the city's web. The empire stretches vast, and within the capital, you might hear a swirl of languages, Latin mingled with Greek, whispers of Syrian, Egyptian, or Gaulish tongues. And yet, over them all, the sense of food remained familiar. The cooking fires and simmering pots speak a universal language, the language of hunger and of comfort. The ingredients of Roman street food were humble but surprisingly varied. Grains were the foundation. Barley and wheat provided bread, porridge, and the coarse, filling cakes that kept the masses fed. Legumes, lentils, chickpeas, and beans filled many bowls stretched with olive oil, herbs, or bits of salted fish. Vegetables like cabbage, leeks, onions, and garlic added substance, while fruits, figs, dates, apples, and grapes lent moments of sweetness. And of course, fish and meats, though often in small, modest amounts were present in sausages, salted cuts, or stews thickened with bones. There was one flavor above all that defined Roman food: garum. This fermented fish sauce, made from small fish left to dissolve slowly in salt, was poured generously into dishes. For the Roman palate, it added depth and savoriness, much like soy sauce or anchovy paste in other traditions. To us, it might seem strong or unpleasant, but for them, it was indispensable. Vendors on the streets would keep jars of garum nearby, ready to drizzle it over bowls of beans or lentils before serving. The smell was pungent, salty, and unmistakably Roman. To imagine the midday meal, picture a worker stopping at a stall after hours of hauling goods, or a craftsman pausing after shaping stone or metal. He might pay a single coin for a piece of bread and some olives, perhaps with cheese wrapped in fig leaves. Another coin might add a cup of watered wine, not drunk for pleasure alone, but as a safer alternative to water, which could be questionable in quality. Around him, others eat with the same quiet practicality. Some linger, trading stories, while others eat quickly before returning to their labor. The food itself was not luxurious, yet carried comfort. Bread with sesame seeds dipped in olive oil. Pottage, a simple stew made by boiling whatever ingredients were available, thickened until it resembled porridge. Small pastries filled with honey or nuts, sold from street corners to children tugging at their mother's tunics. Each dish carried the rhythm of necessity, yet also of familiarity. For those who lived day by day, a hot meal from a vendor was not indulgence, but survival. The stalls themselves were small, often little more than counters built into the walls of buildings. A few had benches or stools, but many offered standing meals, quickly eaten before moving on. The vendors called out in simple phrases, drawing customers with the promise of warmth or freshness. Sometimes a traveling musician might play nearby, his notes blending with the chatter, giving the place a faint sense of celebration, even in the midst of toil. There is also a social quality here worth noticing. Eating in public meant mingling with neighbors and strangers alike. A man might stand beside a freed slave, both drinking from clay cups without ceremony. A woman returning from the baths might purchase honey cakes alongside children of poorer families. In these moments, the rigid divisions of Roman society softened slightly. Food in the streets, by its nature, was a leveler. The wealthy dined in triclinium halls, reclining on couches, but the majority stood shoulder to shoulder at the thermopolium. The sounds of this meal were not hurried clatters, but steady and constant. The scrape of ladles against clay jars, the splash of wine into cups, the tearing of bread shared between hands. Imagine it, not as noisy chaos, but as a steady background hum, almost like the gentle white noise of a city alive yet calm. To listen to it is to feel the pulse of Rome without the roar of politics or war, simply the quiet persistence of people living, working, and eating. The flavors were often strong, but the diet was remarkably healthy for many. Vegetables, grains, and legumes formed the bulk, while meat was a rarity. This practical fare gave energy to workers who built aqueducts, carried amphorae of wine, or swept the streets. To us, the dishes might seem plain, even repetitive, yet to the Roman citizen, they were familiar comforts, repeated daily like the rhythm of sunrise and sunset. As you let this picture settle in your imagination, notice how close food and survival are tied. Without easy kitchens, without personal stoves or ovens, the people of Rome relied on these vendors. The stalls were not luxuries. They were essential infrastructure, as important to the city's life as aqueducts or roads. Without them, the ordinary rhythms of Rome would falter. And so, in this simple picture of bread, beans, and wine, we glimpse something profound. The way an empire sustains itself not only with armies and laws, but with the daily meals of its countless citizens. To walk through these stalls is to hear the heartbeat of Rome itself. As the day in Rome stretches onward, the rhythm of the city shifts again. Morning's bustle has given way to the steadier hum of midday, and now, as the sun lowers toward the horizon. The streets change character once more. Shadows lengthen across the paving stones. Oil lamps are lit, their flickering flames set into bronze holders or clay niches along the walls. The smell of wood smoke thickens as vendors prepare their evening offerings. By this hour, many of the workers return from long days at the docks, in the workshops, or in the endless chores of maintaining the city. Their steps lead not to kitchens and cramped apartments, but again toward the food stalls. For those living in the upper floors of the towering insulae, with narrow wooden staircases and little more than a small hearth, preparing meals is impractical. Some households manage to cook simple stews, but for countless families, the street remains the true kitchen. Evening fare is richer in its variety. Sausages, crisp from the fire, are sold from portable braziers. A vendor slices them into pieces and serves them with hunks of bread. Others prepare fish, grilled over open flame, seasoned heavily with salt and garum to disguise its age. Bowls of hot chickpeas, sprinkled with herbs, offer warmth against the cool night air. Sweet vendors make appearances, too, with trays of honey cakes, their sticky fragrance drifting enticingly toward children tugging at their parents' hands. If you close your eyes, you might hear the clatter of cups against stone counters, the murmurs of conversation blending into a chorus, and the faint music of a reed flute played nearby. The energy is not hurried. The pace is measured, even languid, as Romans linger in conversation while they eat. A group of laborers lean against the counter, laughing softly between bites. A mother carefully feeds her child a piece of bread dipped into stew. Two travelers, dusty from the road, find comfort in a hot meal before retiring to a crowded lodging house. This is the Rome that does not make it into triumphant histories, yet it is the Rome that sustained the empire. Without these stalls, without the steady work of vendors and the humble meals they provided, life in this vast and complex city would not have flowed as it did. Each clay bowl, each steaming portion of lentils, is a reminder of how deeply survival depends on shared spaces and common rituals. Even as darkness fully settles, the city does not fall silent. Torches carried by passers-by send streaks of light against the walls. In busy districts, taverns remain open, spilling warmth and laughter into the street. There, food is accompanied by drink, wine, often cut with water, sometimes spiced with herbs. Some taverns develop reputations, whether for quality or for rough company, but all serve the same function: nourishment, fellowship, a pause in the endless tide of living. The rhythm of Roman food is not merely physical. It also carries ritual and memory. Certain dishes are tied to festivals, religious observances, or the cycles of the agricultural year. During Saturnalia, sweet treats are more abundant. On other holy days, offerings of grain or wine are shared. Even in the humblest street stall, these traditions echo faintly, as food ties the individual to the larger rhythm of Rome itself. Now imagine walking away from the stall, belly warmed by a modest stew, hands sticky from a honey cake. You pass beneath the shadows of towering insulae, where the upper windows glow faintly with lamplight. The stones are cool beneath your sandals. Voices echo in the distance, fading gradually as you turn down a quieter lane. The day, with all its demands, begins to soften. In the air, faint smoke lingers, but it mingles with the cool freshness of night. It is in this closing of the day that we find the heart of daily Roman life. Food was not extravagant for most, but it was constant, dependable, woven into every hour. From bread at dawn to stew at night. The people of Rome found sustenance not in marble halls, but in the hum of streets, the glow of stalls, the comfort of meals eaten in company. This daily cycle, morning bread, midday porridges, evening stews, is so steady, so unremarkable that it is almost hypnotic. It is the rhythm of living itself, repeated, predictable, and grounding. And as we close this first segment, you may notice how easily the mind drifts when following such steady patterns. The life of ancient Rome, when stripped of emperors and battles, becomes simply human and therefore deeply familiar. In this way, we conclude our immersion into the daily life of Roman street food. From morning to evening, from grain to garum, the people of Rome sustained themselves not with grandeur, but with the simple, repeated rituals of eating together. And as we move forward, we will turn from this broad picture to a closer lens. A single story, a life shaped by the rhythms of food, revealing how personal and powerful this humble world could be. Having wandered through the general life of Roman streets, let us now pause and turn to a more personal view. History becomes most vivid when imagined through the experiences of individuals. And tonight, we will walk in the quiet footsteps of one such figure. Not a senator, not an emperor, but a humble vendor, one among the thousands who fed the city. Imagine, if you will, a man named Marcus Livius, a composite figure drawn from fragments of evidence left in inscriptions, graffiti, and archaeological remains. Marcus is not famous. His name does not appear in scrolls of senators or chronicles of wars. But his life reflects the countless vendors whose labors sustained Rome. To picture his story is to picture a day in the life of the city itself. Marcus was born not in Rome, but in a small coastal town of Campania. His family were fishermen, and from a young age he learned to gut fish, to salt them, and to carry them to market. The smell of brine and sea followed him into adulthood. Like many in the provinces, he dreamed of Rome, the great capital, where fortunes could be made if one had skill and endurance. By his 20s, Marcus had traveled to the city, bringing with him a simple trade, cooking fish for the masses. In Rome, he set up a stall near the Forum Holatorium, the vegetable market. It was a lively area, filled with merchants selling onions, cabbages, beans, and fruit. Marcus offered something complimentary: fried fish, dipped in flour and cooked in oil until crisp. His tools were simple: a brazier with hot coals, a pan of hammered bronze, and a jar of garum to drizzle over the finished dish. The scent of his stall carried down the street, drawing customers from morning until late at night. To imagine Marcus at work, picture him in a plain tunic, its edges stained from oil and smoke. His hands are practiced, moving steadily from one task to the next. A small boy, perhaps his nephew or a hired helper, carries baskets of fish from the nearby market. Customers approach: a laborer who pays with a copper coin, a freedwoman who chats with Marcus as she buys food for her children, even a soldier off duty who craves something hot after long hours of standing guard. Marcus knows many of his customers by face, if not by name. Some come daily, others only when fortune allows. His stall is not merely a place of exchange, but of recognition. In the blur of the city, such familiarity is a comfort. And though his food is modest, it is dependable. This picture of Marcus tells us much about Roman street vendors. They were entrepreneurs in a city that thrived on constant demand. To sell food required resilience, waking before dawn to prepare, enduring long hours at the stall, and working among smoke, heat, and noise. It was not glamorous, but it was steady, and it gave men like Marcus a place in the economic life of Rome. There's also a larger pattern here. Many vendors were freedmen, former slaves who had gained their liberty. Without access to elite careers, they turned to trade, carving out lives through food, drink, and small services. Others were immigrants from across the empire, bringing flavors and techniques from their homelands. Rome's street food was therefore not purely Roman, but a blend, a constant mixing of traditions, much like the city itself. As evening settles, Marcus tallies his coins, cleans his tools, and prepares for another day. His earnings are not vast, but they sustain him. He rents a small room in an insula, where he shares space with others. At night, he rests, the scent of smoke still clinging to his hands, knowing that tomorrow will bring the same cycle: the gathering of fish, the heat of the brazier, the faces of familiar customers. Through Marcus, we glimpse the rhythm of Rome on a human scale. He is not unique, but he is representative. And in that ordinariness lies something calming. The reassurance that history is not only the story of rulers and wars, but also of vendors, cooks, and eaters. Each life, no matter how humble, contributed to the great organism that was Rome. As you imagine, Marcus, perhaps you also feel a sense of continuity. Across centuries, street vendors continue to fill cities with smells, sounds, and sustenance. The stalls may differ, the flavors may change, but the essence remains. Hot food offered to passersby, nourishment exchanged for coin, and a moment of pause in the flow of urban life. In picturing him, the distant past feels nearer, quieter, and strangely familiar. The life of Marcus the fish vendor gives us one view of Rome's streets, but the story of food in the city was far from uniform. Alongside humble stalls and open counters, there existed a more substantial kind of establishment, the Popina, a tavern where meals and drink were served, often with seating for guests. These places, though sometimes looked down upon by Rome's elite, were central to the daily lives of many. To bring this into focus, let us imagine another figure, Lucia Emilia, a tavern keeper. Unlike Marcus, who worked in the open air, Lucia ran a small popina near one of the city's busier crossroads. Her establishment was modest, with rough plastered walls and a counter faced with colorful tiles. Clay jars filled the counter's openings, each containing a different offering. Lentil stew in one, spiced wine in another, olives preserved in brine in yet another. Lucia had inherited the tavern from her father, a freedman who had built the business after years of service in a wealthy household. As a woman managing a popina, she occupied a role that was both respected and suspect. For her neighbors and regular customers, she was a familiar figure, known for her sharp wit and reliable meals. For moralists and elite writers, however, taverns were often dismissed as haunts of the lower classes, places of disorder and idle chatter. Yet for those who actually lived in Rome, they were vital, warm, communal, and sustaining. Step into her tavern in your imagination. The floor is paved with simple stones, worn smooth by countless feet. A smoky glow fills the air, cast by oil lamps that flicker against the plastered walls. Customers lean against the counter or sit on low benches, their voices mingling in a steady hum. Some speak of the day's work, others of rumors from the forum, while travelers rest their weary bodies before continuing their journey tomorrow. The air is thick with the scent of wine, bread, and simmering legumes. Lucia herself moves steadily behind the counter. She ladles stew into bowls, pours wine from amphorae, and exchanges coins with practiced ease. To her, each transaction is routine, yet it is also survival. The tavern provides her income, her identity, her place in the fabric of Rome. On festival days, her popina becomes even livelier. During the games at the Circus Maximus, crowds pass her tavern on their way back from the spectacle. Some stop for wine, others for quick meals before returning to their homes. For a brief time, the air fills with excitement, laughter, toasts, and the clatter of cups. Yet even in these moments, the rhythm remains measured, steady, as if Rome itself breathes through such gatherings. The existence of women like Lucia also reminds us that Roman food culture was not only about men in togas or soldiers at rest. Women, freedmen, immigrants, all played roles in keeping the city fed. And though elite authors may have frowned upon taverns, they could not deny their necessity. Without them, many Romans would have gone hungry. From inscriptions and archaeological remains, we know that taverns were numerous. Some scholars estimate thousands dotted the city, their counters opening directly onto the streets. The evidence comes in the form of graffiti, broken amphorae, and the remains of dolias set into counters. These fragments, quiet as they are, testify to the countless meals once served, the conversations once shared. Lucia's tavern may have been small, but within its walls, one finds a microcosm of Roman society. Freedmen sat beside laborers, soldiers beside travelers, children beside their parents. The distinctions of class blurred slightly in such spaces. Food and drink became common ground, a unifying rhythm in a city that otherwise divided so sharply between rich and poor. Imagine leaving her popina at night. The lamps burn low, their oil nearly spent. Lucia wipes her hands on her tunic and closes the shutters. Inside, the smell of the day lingers, wine, oil, smoke, woven into the very plaster of the walls. Outside, the street grows quieter, though distant sounds still carry. The rolling of cartwheels, the occasional bark of a dog, the murmur of voices fading into the dark. Through her life, as through Marcus's, we see how ordinary Romans carved stability out of the restless city. These lives are rarely written in grand histories, but they endure in the very stones and shards left behind. And to linger with them, to picture their routines, is to sense the quiet heartbeat of the empire, steady and enduring, like the rhythm of a lullaby. Festivals in Rome were not simply days of entertainment. They were collective pauses in the city's rhythm, moments when work slowed, games filled the arenas, and streets transformed into flowing rivers of people. For the vendors and tavern keepers of the city, festivals were opportunities, not just for profit, but for visibility, for taking part in the pulse of Rome itself. To bring this to life, imagine the Ludi Romani, one of the oldest and grandest festivals celebrated in honor of Jupiter. For several days each September, processions, theatrical performances, and races filled the city. Crowds streamed through the streets, and the Circus Maximus swelled with spectators. It was on such days that vendors like Marcus and tavern keepers like Lucia found themselves at the heart of Rome's public life. Picture the scene along the road leading toward the Circus Maximus. The morning sun casts a golden glow over the crowd as families, laborers, freedmen, and even senators' attendants move together in a great wave. Street vendors line the route. Some sell bread rolls still warm from communal ovens. Others offer small cakes sweetened with honey. The air carries competing scents: fried fish, roasted chickpeas, spiced wine. Voices rise in laughter and anticipation, mingling with the distant sound of trumpets announcing the games. Marcus has moved his stall closer to the circus for the day. His brazier smokes steadily as he fries fish for an eager stream of customers. His nephew runs back and forth, carrying baskets emptied almost as soon as they are filled. The work is constant, but there's a certain joy in it, a sense that he is part of something larger, feeding not just individuals, but the collective energy of the festival itself. Nearby, Lucia's tavern is crowded. Her benches, usually half-filled on ordinary evenings, are overflowing. Travelers who have come from distant towns squeeze in beside locals, sharing cups of watered wine and plates of lentils. Outside her door, the hum of the crowd continues, but inside, a more intimate chorus takes shape. The scrape of spoons on clay bowls, the clink of cups meeting in small toasts, the steady chatter of people warmed by food and companionship. For the ordinary people of Rome, festivals were chances to forget the weight of daily labor. A dock worker who hauled amphorae all week might, for one evening, drink deeply in Lucia's tavern. A child who rarely tasted sweets might, during the festival, enjoy a honey cake bought from a vendor's tray. These moments, though brief, were remembered. They stitched together the hardships of life with threads of joy and indulgence. Festivals also blurred lines of class, if only slightly. Though seating in the Circus Maximus was arranged by social rank, in the streets outside, distinctions mattered less. Vendors served whoever came with coin in hand. Taverns welcomed whomever could squeeze inside. The city itself seemed to breathe differently, more inclusively, as if acknowledging that its vast population needed such moments of unity. By evening, when the races ended and crowds poured from the circus, the streets became livelier still. Torches flickered in the dusk, casting dancing shadows across the faces of vendors still working their braziers. The smell of roasted meats drifted through the cooling air. Groups of friends lingered, reluctant to let the day end. Children clutched half-eaten treats. Even the tired feet of laborers carried them more lightly, buoyed by the rare gift of festivity. And when at last the festival quieted, the vendors packed their tools, the taverns emptied, and the city returned to its ordinary rhythm, what remained was a shared memory. For Marcus, it was the heavy pouch of coins, but also the satisfaction of having fed so many. For Lucia, it was the warmth of a tavern filled with voices, her livelihood affirmed by the sheer necessity of her work. For Rome itself, it was another cycle completed, a reminder that the empire's strength was not only in its armies or its emperors, but in the simple resilience and joy of its people. In these glimpses of festival life, we see how food was more than sustenance. It was social glue, weaving together lives and moments. A fried fish, a cup of wine, a honey cake, each became part of memories that carried Romans through the long, restless pace of urban living. Even in the grandeur of the empire, the quiet labors of cooks, vendors, and tavern keepers gave texture and life to its celebrations. When we speak of Roman street food, we are not limited to written descriptions or scattered mentions in ancient texts. Much of what we know today comes from the silent evidence of archaeology, the careful uncovering of structures, tools, and food remains that survive the passing of centuries. Among these discoveries, none is more telling than the ruins of the Thermopolia, the small shops that once dotted Roman streets. A thermopolium was, in essence, a place where hot food and drink were sold. For most Romans living in cramped apartments without kitchens, these counters were not luxuries but necessities. Archaeologists have uncovered dozens of them in Pompeii and Herculaneum, preserved by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE. Walking through the remains of these cities, one can almost imagine the hum of activity, the clatter of bowls, the warmth of food prepared for countless hungry patrons. The structure of a thermopolium is distinctive. Picture a stone counter facing the street, built solidly to withstand constant use. Embedded into the counter are round openings, like great stone jars set into the surface. These were dolia, large ceramic containers used to store food, often stews, grains, or even wine. From these openings, vendors could serve customers directly, ladling portions into small bowls or cups. Behind the counter, a modest space allowed for storage, preparation, and sometimes a simple hearth or brazier for heating food. To modernize, there is something familiar about these places. They resemble, in many ways, the food stalls or takeaway shops we encounter today. The principle was the same: quick, affordable meals served to a public that did not always have the means or time to cook at home. In this sense, the Thermopolia are reminders of the continuity of human habits, the enduring need for accessible food on the go. What makes these sites especially intriguing are the traces of food still found within them. In some dolia, archaeologists discovered remnants of lentils and beans, carbonized but intact. Others held fragments of fish bones or traces of nuts and olives. In one case, shells of snails were uncovered, evidence of dishes seasoned with herbs and perhaps a drizzle of garum, the famous Roman fish sauce. These small remains, preserved by volcanic ash, are not grand artifacts of emperors, but simple echoes of ordinary meals. They tell us what Romans truly ate, not in the idealized feast described by satirists, but in the everyday transactions of city life. The Thermopolia also tell us something about social interaction. These were not merely points of purchase, but gathering spaces. People met at the counters to talk, to share food, to exchange gossip. Inscriptions and graffiti found near some shops record small jokes, names, or even prices of meals. One fragment reads like an advertisement, a boast of the quality of wine available within. Another contains the scrawl of a patron leaving behind a complaint, proof that the habits of customers have changed little across millennia. In Pompeii, one particularly well-preserved thermopolium still bears painted decorations along its counter. The images show animals, including roosters and ducks, perhaps suggesting what dishes were sold there. The paint, though faded, lingers with enough clarity to remind us that even simple shops had a sense of presentation, a way to appeal visually to passers-by. One can almost see the stall lit by daylight, its colors catching the eye of a hungry traveler. The placement of these establishments also reveals much. Thermopolia were often located along busy streets, near crossroads, or close to public baths. In such places, foot traffic was steady and demand for quick meals constant. Workers emerging from the baths, refreshed but hungry, would stop for a bowl of hot stew or a cup of mulled wine. Travelers arriving through city gates could find immediate sustenance without needing to enter private homes. For the poor, these stalls were not indulgences but lifelines woven into the fabric of survival. Yet, despite their ubiquity, Thermopolia carried a certain reputation. Riders of the elite classes sometimes looked down on them, associating them with lower status citizens or with rowdy behavior. To eat at a street counter was, in their view, less dignified than dining at home or in the halls of the wealthy. Still, the sheer number of Thermopolia tells us that disdain did not prevent their widespread use. Rome was too vast, too crowded, and too hungry for such prejudices to stop the flow of business. Archaeology here provides more than facts. It offers texture. The worn edges of counters show where countless hands rested. The scorch marks on stone walls whisper of years of cooking fires. The clay cups and plates, often discarded nearby, remind us of meals finished quickly and vessels not worth saving. Each detail adds to the rhythm of life, a rhythm of hunger, work, and the modest satisfaction of eating. Perhaps the most haunting thought is that these shops, preserved in sudden catastrophe, were once so ordinary that no one would have considered them worth recording in detail. They were simply part of daily existence, as unremarkable to Romans as the corner cafe is to us. And yet, centuries later, their traces survive as some of the clearest windows into the reality of ancient urban living. As you picture these ancient counters, the dolia filled with steaming food, the painted walls, the voices of customers leaning in to order, allow your mind to drift. Imagine the heat of the hearth, the aroma of beans stewing with herbs, the coolness of a clay cup in your hand. In these images, you're connected not just to history, but to the timeless act of gathering, eating, and living together in community. Archaeological remains tell us what was eaten and how it was sold. But to fully understand Roman street food, we need to look at its cultural significance. Food, after all, is never only about nutrition. It carries with it layers of meaning, status, ritual, identity. In Rome, every meal was woven into the broader fabric of society, echoing both the city's vast diversity and its strict social hierarchies. Roman writers often contrasted the simple meals of the poor with the extravagant banquets of the wealthy. Elite authors such as Seneca or Juvenal mocked the excess of feasts where delicacies like peacock tongues or dormice stuffed with nuts appeared. In their words, we hear both disapproval and fascination. Yet while they described such spectacles, the reality for most Romans was far humbler. Bread dipped in oil, beans simmered with herbs, porridge flavored with fish sauce. Street food, then, became not just a practical choice, but a cultural marker, a daily reminder of one's place within Rome's vast social pyramid. Consider bread, perhaps the most essential of Roman foods. For the rich, bread might be finely sifted, made from high-quality wheat, white and soft. For the poor, it was coarser, darker, sometimes mixed with barley or other grains. Yet in the bustling bakeries that supplied both homes and street vendors, these differences blurred. Bread sold in markets was shared across classes, creating moments of commonality within a divided city. Archaeological discoveries of carbonized loaves in Pompeii, neatly stamped with the baker's seal, show us how standardized this staple became, a symbol of Rome's ability to feed its enormous population. Another cultural thread was wine. Though often associated with elite banquets, wine was a universal presence, found even in the humblest taverns. For the poor, it was usually diluted with water, perhaps flavored with herbs or sweetened with honey. In street-side Thermopolia, jars of wine stood ready to be ladled into cups. To drink wine, no matter the quality, was to participate in a tradition that linked peasants and senators alike. And yet, subtle distinctions persisted. The vintage, the region of origin, and the additives used could all signal one's social position. Thus, the same drink carried both unity and division. Fish sauce, or garum, provides another glimpse into Roman cultural complexity. Made from fermented fish and widely traded across the empire, Garum was poured into stews, on a bread, even into sweet dishes. It was ubiquitous, and yet not all garum was equal. Some varieties, produced in Spain or North Africa, were prized and costly. Others, locally made, were far cheaper. When archaeologists uncover amphorae bearing labels of garum shipments, they're finding not just evidence of food, but of commerce, identity, and taste. A splash of garum in a street vendor's stew connected the eater not only to the cook, but to the distant coast where the sauce was made. Food was also tied to ritual. Street offerings were common during festivals or religious ceremonies. Vendors sold small cakes and breads shaped for sacrifice, often purchased by those too poor to prepare such items at home. These were laid at shrines, burned in honor of gods, or shared among participants. In this way, street food became a bridge between the sacred and the ordinary, allowing even the humblest citizen to take part in Rome's spiritual life. At the same time, public opinion about street dining carried ambivalence. For the wealthy, eating outside was sometimes associated with disorder or moral laxity. Taverns were depicted in literature as places of drunkenness, gambling, or questionable company. Yet these critiques reveal more about elite anxieties than about the actual role of food stalls. Archaeological evidence shows that taverns in Thermopolia were widespread, thriving, and deeply embedded in urban life. For most Romans, they were not dens of vice, but necessary, familiar spaces, places to rest, to meet, to eat. Inscriptions carved into walls provide glimpses of these interactions. A scratch poem found in Pompeii mentions the pleasure of drinking cheap wine with friends in a small tavern. Another fragment records a playful insult directed at a rival shop, suggesting competition among vendors. These bits of graffiti, casual and unpolished, remind us that Roman food culture was lived in the moment, full of humor, rivalry, and shared experience. The diversity of Rome's population added further layers. Immigrants brought their own flavors: spices from the East, grains from Egypt, fish from the Mediterranean coasts. Street stalls often reflected this variety, offering dishes flavored with pepper, cumin, or coriander, seasonings that traveled hundreds of miles before reaching Roman pots. In this sense, to eat at a Roman food stall was to taste the empire itself, condensed into a bowl of stew or a piece of bread dipped in oil. Archaeology reveals even the economic rhythms of these practices. Excavated coin hoards found near taverns suggest how daily transactions accumulated. A few copper coins paid for a bowl of lentils. A silver piece might cover several meals. The repetition of these small exchanges kept the urban economy flowing, sustaining both vendors and customers in a delicate balance. Seen through this lens, street food becomes more than an afterthought of history. It emerges as a cultural stage where identity, economy, and ritual intersected. The counters of Thermopolia were meeting points where rich and poor brushed shoulders, where the empire's trade routes converged in flavor, and where the sacred mingled with the mundane. Imagine yourself standing at such a counter. In your hands is a piece of bread stamped with a baker's seal. In the air, the aroma of garum mixes with the sweetness of honey cakes. Around you, voices rise in laughter, in barter, in gossip. Each detail, though ordinary, carries meaning. And as you drift into these images, you may sense how deeply the Roman world lived through its food, not just in survival, but in identity, memory, and belonging. For all the details that archaeology has revealed about Roman food culture, much remains hidden. The stones of Thermopolia, the fragments of amphorae, and the charred remains of meals frozen in volcanic ash tell only part of the story. What is missing, perhaps more than anything, are the voices of the ordinary Romans who lived these experiences daily. We know the names of emperors, generals, and wealthy patrons of the arts. Their meals were recorded, their tastes exaggerated or criticized in the works of poets and philosophers. But the millions of men, women, and children who crowded Rome's narrow streets left fewer traces. The laughter of a group sharing roasted chickpeas after a day of labor, the sigh of someone sipping warm wine on a cold evening, the small satisfaction of biting into a loaf of bread after waiting in line at a bakery. These are details we must reconstruct gently, with imagination informed by what the earth has preserved. One mystery lies in the recipes themselves. Archaeologists find ingredients, grains, legumes, fragments of meat or fish, but the exact flavors, the proportions, the textures of daily meals are lost. We can speculate that beans simmered with onions and herbs might have been seasoned with garum. We can imagine a honey cake as sweet, sticky, and fragrant. Yet the precise combinations, the particular skills of each cook, the personal touches added by a vendor like Marcus or a tavern keeper like Lucia, these vanish in time. Each meal was unique, and those nuances are gone. Another gap lies in the rhythms of daily eating. Did workers pause at midday for a quick bowl of porridge? Did families gather in taverns in the evening? Or was it mostly single men who ate at counters? Inscriptions and graffiti offer hints, but much remains unclear. The silence of history here is not troubling, but strangely soothing. It leaves room for us to picture scenes that may never be proven, yet feel undeniably real. A mother feeding her child bits of bread at a crowded counter. A group of bathers stepping out into the street and seeking warm food before returning home. Even the economics of these meals carry unanswered questions. How much did a bowl of stew cost compared to a day's wages? How often could the poorest afford even these humble dishes? Prices recorded in a few inscriptions provide fragments, but the full picture is hazy. What is clear, however, is that vendors and tavern keepers formed part of a fragile web that kept the city alive, sustaining a population that would otherwise have struggled to feed itself. Some mysteries are more tactile. Archaeologists uncovered dolia with residue still clinging to their interiors, a dark stain that once held wine, a crust that hints at grain porridge. But much of the sensory world is gone. The aroma of frying fish in oil, the steam rising from beans simmering in clay pots, the sound of knives chopping herbs in a crowded stall. These cannot be excavated. They exist only in imagination, in the careful act of placing ourselves into the spaces archaeology has revealed. And then there are the foods that vanish altogether. We read of fruits, vegetables, and meats in texts, but the fragile remains rarely survive. How many varieties of apples or pears were eaten? What subtle flavors of wild greens were foraged and sold? What dishes were beloved by children, by elders, by workers finishing long shifts? These questions remain unanswered, like shadows cast by objects no longer present. The greatest mystery, perhaps, is how Romans themselves experienced the texture of their food culture. Was it comforting? Was it tedious? Did they grow weary of lentils and bread? Or did they take quiet joy in the constancy of these staples? We can guess, but we cannot know. Archaeology gives us the framework, the counters, the pots, the coins, but the emotional layer, the lived human response, rests forever beyond reach. And yet, there is value in this incompleteness. The gaps invite us to wander in thought, to imagine ourselves as participants in a vanished world, to walk past the stone counters of Pompeii, to rest a hand on the worn edge, to feel the faint trace of warmth as if a pot of stew had just been lifted away, to hear the echo of footsteps in the street, and to sense, faintly, the satisfaction of countless meals once eaten there. As you drift deeper into this story, let the missing pieces become part of the calm. The unknowns of Roman food culture remind us that history is not a rigid record, but a tapestry woven of fragments. Some threads are clear and bright. The thermopylae counters, the painted walls, the stamped loaves of bread. Others are faded or lost entirely. Yet together, they form an image rich enough to hold in the mind, soft enough to guide the imagination toward rest. The mysteries are not puzzles demanding solutions. They are spaces for reflection, pauses where the mind can linger. In that quiet, you are free to picture Rome as you wish, a city alive with scents and sounds, crowded yet intimate, its streets glowing in the light of oil lamps, its counters lined with steaming bowls. Whether or not the details match reality does not matter. What matters is the gentle rhythm of imagining, the slow unfolding of lives once lived, and the soothing realization that the past, like the present, was filled with small, ordinary moments of nourishment and connection. If the food stalls and taverns represented the heartbeat of daily life for Rome's masses, the dining halls of the wealthy existed in a world of contrast. The same city that fed its workers with bowls of lentils and hunks of coarse bread also staged elaborate feasts where dishes shimmered with exotic ingredients and luxury was displayed with calculated extravagance. For ordinary people, food was about sustenance, convenience, and affordability. A quick stop at a thermopolium gave them warmth and fuel to continue their work. The setting was functional: stone counters, clay bowls, perhaps a wooden bench. Meals were eaten standing, in haste, or carried away. Bread filled the stomach. Porridge provided bulk. The flavors were simple, the choices limited, but there was comfort in their familiarity. In the villas of the elite, however, food became a language of power and prestige. A dinner invitation was not merely a gesture of friendship, but an opportunity for display. Guests reclined on couches in lavish triclinium dining rooms, their walls painted with scenes of gods, myths, or landscapes. Lamps glowed softly as slaves moved silently, carrying trays of food prepared by skilled cooks. Every detail was orchestrated to communicate wealth, taste, and social standing. The menus of these banquets bore little resemblance to the fare of the street. Exotic spices traveled from the east, transported across dangerous routes. Peacocks were roasted not for flavor, but for spectacle. Dormice were stuffed with pork and pine nuts, a delicacy almost unimaginable to the common citizen. Fish sauce was used in abundance, but not the simple garum of the corner shop. Rather, refined blends, aged and prized, their jars more costly than some workers earned in weeks. Honey, a luxury sweetener, flowed freely at these tables. Desserts of nuts and fruits were dressed in syrup, wine, and spices. Wines themselves were chosen with care, diluted in precise measures, and often flavored with herbs or flowers. In contrast, the poor often drank rougher wines or simple water, sometimes tinged with vinegar to mask its quality. Even a way of eating diverged sharply. At the thermopolium, one ate quickly, perhaps in noisy company, standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers. At the banquet, guests reclined leisurely, eating in courses that extended over hours. Conversation, entertainment, and display of wit were as essential as the food itself. Musicians, poets, and dancers sometimes performed between courses, blurring the line between meal and theater. This divide reveals not only two diets, but two experiences of life. For the elite, food was a canvas for showing refinement, wealth, and connections. For the majority, it was a daily act of survival, shaped by routine and necessity. Yet both worlds intersected in subtle ways. The garum used in elite sauces came from the same fisheries that supplied cheaper versions to the poor. The bread that filled a villa's dining table was baked in ovens much like those of the public bakeries. The difference lay not only in quality, but in context, in how food was framed, served, and valued. The contrast also extended to availability. While workers sometimes relied on food distributions from the state, free grain or subsidized bread, the wealthy controlled access to rare imports. Dates from North Africa, spices from India, oysters from distant coasts. These traveled hundreds or even thousands of miles, carried on ships that filled Rome's ports with abundance. To eat such foods was not only to indulge, but to declare one's reach across the empire. And yet, beneath the grandeur, there were critics. Writers like Juvenal and Seneca mocked the excesses of Roman banquets. They pointed out the absurdity of eating flamingo tongues or lavishly decorated peacocks while so many citizens lived on humble rations. Satire exposed the hollow core of luxury, reminding audiences that extravagance did not guarantee happiness or virtue. Still, the attraction of spectacle endured. To dine at such a table was to step into a world of shimmering wealth, where taste was sharpened not just by flavors, but by the sense of belonging to an exclusive circle. The difference between a steaming bowl at a street counter and a gilded platter in a villa was more than food. It was a measure of the gap between classes, etched into daily life with undeniable clarity. As you listen now, perhaps picture both scenes at once. A laborer lifting a spoonful of lentil stew by lamplight, and across the city, an aristocrat reclining beneath painted ceilings, tasting honeyed fruits. Two meals, two worlds, unfolding at the same time, both sustained by the same city, both essential to understanding the breadth of Roman life. This contrast is not harsh or troubling here. It is simply part of the rhythm of history. The grandeur of the elite and the simplicity of the poor were two notes in a larger composition, a melody of sustenance and celebration, survival and spectacle. And together, they remind us that food, in every age, reflects both what is available and what is aspired to. When we look more closely at the banquets of Rome's wealthy, we discover that they were not merely private affairs of indulgence, but highly ritualized performances that carried deep cultural meaning. Every cushion, every cup, and every dish carried a message. To recline at one of these tables was to take part in a carefully orchestrated display of hierarchy and hospitality. The triclinium itself, the three-sided dining room arrangement, revealed much about the structure of Roman society. 3 couches surrounded a central table, each couch divided into 3 reclining spaces. The positions were not equal. The central place on the main couch was considered the seat of honor, while others reflected rank and status. Guests were assigned their spots with care, according to relationships, alliances, and the subtle calculations of prestige. A nobleman might seat a powerful senator in the place of honor, while a client or less influential friend might find himself relegated to a lower position. Even in leisure, hierarchy spoke loudly. The act of reclining itself was a statement. Only free men of status were permitted to recline during meals. Women sometimes joined, though their position was debated and varied by household. Slaves, naturally, never reclined. They moved silently about the room, attending to the needs of the diners, often invisible despite their essential presence. The banquet unfolded in courses, each with its own rhythm. First came the gustatio, the appetizers, eggs, olives, salads, and light dishes to awaken the appetite. Wine was served early, sometimes mixed with honey or herbs. Then came the cena proper, the main meal, with multiple courses, fish, meats, vegetables, stews, and breads. At last arrived the secunda mensa, the second table, a course of fruits, nuts, and sweetened creations. Honey cakes, dates stuffed with almonds, or figs drizzled with syrup brought the feast to a gentle close. Each course was punctuated by conversation and entertainment. Guests shared stories, debated politics, and recited verses. Musicians played soft melodies on flutes or lyres, while acrobats or dancers occasionally entered to delight the company. Sometimes poets or philosophers were invited to speak, turning the meal into an intellectual salon as much as a culinary indulgence. The host's success was measured not only by the abundance of food, but by the harmony of the evening, the quality of discussion, and the atmosphere he could create. The tableware itself became part of the message. Bronze platters, silver cups, and glass vessels shimmered in the lamplight. Fine pottery from Greece or painted ware from Italy carried prestige. Even the napkins had significance. Embroidered cloths might be given to guests as tokens of favor, small reminders of the night's generosity. Banquets also served political purposes. A wealthy Roman was expected to practice convivium, the art of shared dining. By feeding others, he displayed his wealth and reinforced his role as patron. Guests, often clients or allies, left indebted not only for the meal, but for the social bond it represented. Alliances were formed over roasted meats and honeyed wine. Decisions that shaped politics or business might begin as casual conversation between bites of fruit. The cultural symbolism extended further. The act of reclining together, sharing food and drink, echoed ancient Greek practices and linked Roman elites to a tradition of civilized leisure. To host or attend such a feast was to affirm one's identity as part of Rome's cultivated upper world. It was not gluttony, at least not in theory. It was refinement, sophistication, and the embodiment of Roman virtue expressed in the language of abundance. Of course, not everyone viewed it so charitably. Satirists like Juvenal skewered the hypocrisy of hosts who offered meager dishes to lower-ranking guests while serving delicacies to their peers. Petronius, in his Satyricon, crafted vivid, mocking depictions of overstuffed banquets where excess slipped into absurdity. These criticisms show that Romans themselves recognized the contradictions at the heart of their feasts. The blending of generosity with self-display, hospitality with hierarchy. Still, the rituals persisted. A feast without structure, without symbolic ordering, would have been considered vulgar. To skip the opening appetizers or to serve wine without dilution would have been unthinkable breaches of etiquette. The host's reputation rested on balance. Enough luxury to impress, enough restraint to appear cultured, and enough generosity to bind the guests in loyalty. Even the wine held meaning. Romans never drank it straight. To do so was considered barbaric. Instead, it was mixed with water and often with honey, herbs, or spices. The mixing bowl, or crater, stood as a central object, a symbol of moderation and civilization. The way wine was poured and shared reflected the host's refinement and the guest's respect for tradition. For the wealthy, these banquets were theaters of identity. To be seen reclining among gilded vessels, tasting dishes prepared with ingredients from distant provinces, listening to musicians and poets, was to participate in the performance of being Roman. Not just any Roman, but one at the center of culture and power. Imagine yourself now, reclining on a cushioned couch beneath frescoed walls, the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. A slave pours wine gently into your cup. Across the table, trays of figs, roasted fowl, and seasoned fish are carried in. Voices rise and fall in soft conversation, punctuated by bursts of laughter. The evening stretches on, unhurried, the courses unfolding in gentle rhythm. Time itself seems to slow, as if suspended in the glow of oil lamps and the comfort of shared abundance. It was in these rituals that the elite of Rome found not only nourishment, but affirmation of their place in the world. And though the flavors have long faded, the echoes of these feasts remain, reminders of a society where even eating was transformed into a stage upon which power, culture, and identity were endlessly performed. As our journey through the Roman table nears its close, it is worth lingering on the contrast we have explored, the hurried meals of the many and the drawn-out banquets of the few. Yet history seldom exists in stark division. Beneath the surface of difference, connections emerge, threads weaving the experiences of rich and poor into a shared fabric of daily life. The ordinary laborer at the Thermopolium and the senator reclining in his triclinium were both sustained by the same systems of production and trade. Grain ships crossed the Mediterranean not for the poor alone or the elite alone, but for the city as a whole. Fishermen on distant coasts supplied both the garum that flavored humble porridges and the refined sauces poured at aristocratic banquets. Farmers in the countryside grew olives and pressed oil, their amphorae destined for both public counters and private villas. The divergence was not in the source of the food, but in its preparation, presentation, and meaning. A simple loaf, eaten quickly at a street corner, was fuel. The same loaf, served on a silver platter beside honey and fruit, became a symbol of refinement. Lentils, onions, and barley could nourish a worker's family, while those same ingredients might appear, artfully seasoned, as part of a course at a patrician feast. The ingredients overlapped. The worlds they created diverged. There's also a rhythm of continuity. At the Thermopolium, meals were communal by necessity. Men and women ate side by side, surrounded by noise, the air filled with conversation and the clatter of bowls. At the banquet, meals were communal by design. Guests shared reclining couches, shared wine from mixing bowls, shared entertainment. Both settings brought people together, though the tones differed, one born of daily survival, the other of leisure and display. The contrast can be seen in time itself. For the working poor, meals were brief, fitting into the day's demands. For the wealthy, meals could stretch into the night, hours drifting by in a rhythm that emphasized freedom from labor. To have time to linger was itself a privilege, a statement as powerful as the food served. Yet even with such differences, both meals carried comfort. A steaming bowl of barley stew might have given a worker warmth against the evening chill, just as honeyed figs gave sweetness to the senator at his feast. Each meal, in its own way, marked a pause in the flow of life, a moment to rest, to gather, and to be sustained. The very existence of contrast gave meaning to each world. The poor looked upward, sometimes with envy, sometimes with indifference, at the luxury of the elite. Satirists mocked the excesses of the wealthy, but their words carried resonance precisely because those excesses stood in contrast to simpler fare. The rich, meanwhile, defined their identity partly through difference. To host a banquet of rare ingredients was to set oneself apart from the common rhythms of bread and porridge. Abundance was meaningful only in a society where scarcity was familiar. Still, Rome was a city of interdependence. The docks where grain arrived, the markets where olives and fish were sold, the bakeries and workshops. These were sustained by both the elite's demand for luxury and the poor's need for staples. Remove either, and the system faltered. The humble and the grand, side by side, created the pulse of the city. It is this interwoven reality that lingers most clearly when we reflect on Roman food culture. The contrast between the crowded Thermopolium and the painted triclinium is striking, but beneath it lies a continuity. The act of eating together, the dependence on trade, the shaping of identity through food. Across class and circumstance, Romans of every status shared in the same essential rhythm: to eat, to gather, to sustain life in a city that thrived on abundance and spectacle alike. And so, as you drift further into the calm of this story, picture both ends of the spectrum. Imagine, on one side, the glow of oil lamps in a tavern, bowls of lentils warming tired hands, the chatter of neighbors filling the night air. On the other, picture the golden shimmer of a patrician's dining hall, fruits gleaming with honey, the low hum of music, the laughter of reclining guests. Two worlds unfolding at once, both part of Rome's identity, both remembered in the faint traces left behind. It is not necessary to choose between them. Together, they remind us that history is seldom simple, that life's experiences are layered and shared. The humble meal and the elaborate feast both tell us what it meant to live in Rome. Not only to survive, but to belong, whether among the many or among the few. As these images linger, you may allow them to soften, to blur at the edges. The sound of chatter fades, the lamplight grows dim. What remains is the steady rhythm of lives lived long ago, bound by bread and wine, by hunger and by celebration. In that rhythm, across centuries, there is something soothing, something almost eternal, that still speaks to us now. And so, we come to the end of this long and gentle journey through the foodways of ancient Rome. From the bustling counters of the Thermopolium to the painted dining halls of the elite, from simple stews and loaves of bread to gilded platters of honeyed fruits, we have wandered slowly through a world both distant and strangely familiar. Food, after all, is not only about sustenance. It is about time, place, and meaning. In Rome, a humble meal eaten quickly in the noise of a tavern and a lavish feast stretched across hours in a villa were two different ways of being, yet both marked the rhythm of daily life. Both offered comfort, belonging, and a pause within the flow of existence. As you listen now, in the quiet of your own room, there is something soothing in this reflection. However far removed we are from those crowded streets and dimly lit triclinia, we share with the Romans the same need for nourishment, the same small moments of rest. Their loaves, their stews, their cups of wine, they were echoes of the same rhythm we feel today when we sit down to eat, to gather, to pause. Perhaps you picture again the lamplight of a Roman evening, flickering on plastered walls. Perhaps you imagine the chatter of voices in a marketplace, the soft strumming of a lyre in a dining hall, the faint fragrance of herbs and bread drifting through the air. These images, calm and distant, blur at the edges now, like a dream fading into sleep. There is comfort in knowing that history is filled with such ordinary rhythms, with meals, with pauses, with moments that bound people together. And there is comfort, too, in knowing that across centuries, the simple act of eating, of gathering, of resting, has always been part of the human story. If this gentle exploration has brought you a measure of calm, feel free to let me know by liking the video and subscribing, but only if it truly helps you rest. You can also share in the comments where you're listening from and what time of night it is for you. There's something quietly reassuring about realizing that others, scattered across the world, are drifting off to the same slow rhythm of history at the same time. For now, allow your eyes to grow heavy. Let the images of Rome, the stalls, the banquets, the lamps fade softly into the background. You need carry nothing more with you tonight. The past is at rest, and so too you may rest. Breathe slowly, settle into the quiet, and let sleep take its gentle course. Good night from the sleepy historian. May the rhythms of the past guide you into calm, steady dreams.